Good morning, good morning. How's everyone doing? Or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Hello, hello. We're still having real gloomy, snowy days. Well, it's not snowing anymore, but it is just kind of gloomy here. Colorado is typically a lot more sunny. So anyways, we're gonna paint the bird again. Louisiana, hello, hello. All's well in the Pacific Northwest. You're probably pretty accustomed to gloom. Although, you know, the funny thing is every time I've ever gone to Seattle, it's been sunny for the majority of the time. "6 p.m. in the UK. Nice little Saturday evening activity. And you don't tell people that it's sunny sometimes there. You live in the lavender capital. Oh my gosh, I bet that's beautiful. Can you smell it when you just like drive by? I wanna live near lavender fields. All right, so today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be painting these little birds. Now, I have intentionally not printed out any reference photos because I want this to be a really low pressure activity, and especially if you're like new to watercolor, it's not fun when things don't turn out exactly how you want. So if we kind of go in a little more free form, it'll be more fun because it can kind of turn out however we decide it's turning out, depending on what we're doing. You're going to need some watercolor paper. Today I'm actually going to be using, I'm actually going to be adding these to my shop soon, but these are little kind of postcards that have watercolor paper. So I'm going to be painting on these today because I kind of want to make a couple of these. And then we might be messing around with some backgrounds too. I haven't entirely decided. But yeah, so we're going to be painting some little birds. So grab your watercolors if you want to paint along. Grab a brush. I'm going to be using a round brush today. And some watercolor paper. You have a hobbit house? Are you kidding me? Are you real? You live in the near the lavender capital and you have a hobbit house? That sounds just magical. All right, so I'm going to get kind of set up here. I'm going to start by taping these down, just because I might be using a lot of water. I'm probably going to be painting these a couple different times. We'll start with the main one. I know I have I did make a short video about this, but sometimes it's helpful to actually see it in real time, because even though it didn't take me a ton of time to paint that bird, it definitely took me longer than the 45 seconds that video is. I'm going to go ahead and tape these down. You have a troll farm? Oh my gosh. I used to do pet portraits. I have stopped doing any sort of commissions because I don't really have the time anymore. And I found myself getting really stressed out because I take it like a little too seriously, because especially most people who want a pet portrait, it's a lot of people who've recently lost their dogs and stuff, and it just made me feel really sad because I love dogs. So yeah, I used to do that, but I have stopped. All right, so good morning, good morning. All right, so I'm going to get started by wetting these. There have been a lot of questions on my recent video about wetting your paints, and let's talk briefly about that before we actually get started, just to kind of answer a few questions that people might have. One, you don't have to do this. If some people like to work in thinner, kind of less vibrant layers, and that's totally fine. You also don't have to use a spray bottle. You could come in here and kind of just drip water on each of these or just the ones that you're going to be using. I just end up, I don't know, I don't usually have a plan when I'm painting, so I like to have everything nice and kind of wet. You can also use a pipette for that. It doesn't really damage the pans because they just dry out. You might get a little bit of cracking and things like that, but you're going to get that kind of natural wear and tear on most pans anyways. Kind of depends on the brand. I find Koi becomes like really kind of funky looking after you use them for a while. But they still work just fine, so there's that. And the other thing is, like, were some people who were concerned about the rust and things if you spray in the pan, and that might be a bigger concern for you. I live in Colorado, and we have a pretty dry climate here, so if I just leave this open, it dries in like an hour, so I don't have to worry about that too much. So, the other thing I want to talk about is, yeah, you know, when things start to get a lot of views, which that one is starting to get more views, there's always some negativity, and there's a lot of people being like, how do people not know that? And I just want to keep in mind that this is a channel for people who just enjoy doing art, and you probably didn't go to a fancy art school or necessarily always have access to different supplies. And so there's a first time to learn everything. So I just want to make sure we stay, you know, kind and nice, and you guys are free to ask any sort of questions that you have, because I remember what it was like to not know a lot of things. You're in Colorado too? All right. So what we're going to start by doing, I did a couple little like test ones, which are, you know, this is the little bird that I painted in the video. And you can see this is the one that has the circle and then kind of that oblong pear shape and the little boop for the tail. But we can modify these. You could just make a big egg-shaped one. I actually really like him. I added the eye when it was still a little bit too wet, but I like his little egg shape. This one's a little more similar, but it's also not quite kind of as defined. And we can also change kind of the direction that they're looking and things like that. So we might paint a couple of these in a couple different colors. Let's start off with the one that we painted here. Feel free to change the colors and things that you want to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by putting some fresh, clean water on my brush. And I'm going to, is that a finch? So it kind of is a finch. I mean, I was kind of thinking of these little like chickadees we have in our trees right now. And then I was also thinking about robins. So I kind of mishmashed them together. But yeah, it does kind of look like a little finch. All right, so the general shape, real quick, before I put this on, because it's going to be a little hard to see with the water, but we're going to be placing water down in roughly this shape. So it's going to have like a little circle, and then there's going to be kind of this pear-shaped oblong shape-ish, and I'll kind of round these points a little bit, and then there's just a little like doot down here. We don't need this to be super perfect. I mean, you can make yours as perfect as you want, but I'm not super focused on that. I just want to paint some cute little birds. So I'm going to place this water down on my page. And I'll try to show you the reflection of this in a second. So I've got my little circle here. And then I'm going to put some more water in my brush. And I'm going to kind of make the little belly and that kind of pear shape. And what I'm doing here when I'm moving my page around is I'm trying to catch the light so I can see the reflection. So I can actually see where this water is going. Okay, now adding that little tail. Now it's starting to dry a bit at the top part, so I'm going to go ahead in and put just a little more water towards the top. And now let's see if we can see. Okay, you guys can kind of see that. All right, so this is the back side with the wing back over here. So I'm going to grab some black. You could use whatever color you want for this, but I want the wings to be kind of a black type color. So I'm just going to put this kind of at the back of the head. And here. I went pretty soft, so let's grab a little bit more. And depending on how much water you have, it's going to move more or less. I think I want a little more on the top of the head too. I'm just going to kind of drop this in, and maybe I want a little bit to come kind of around where the chin area is. And if it spreads a little bit too much, like it spread a little too much for there, so I'm going to wash my brush and dry it off. And then I'm just going to lift a little bit of that out to kind of try to control a little bit of where things are moving around. This doesn't need to be perfect because, you know, we're just painting a little imagination bird. I'm going to make sure that some of this kind of seeps towards the bottom. And let's get a little more kind of here on this tail. Might even kind of splay that out a little bit. And maybe just a bit more of this. Right along here. All right, so I'm gonna let that kind of just do its thing there, and I'm gonna move on to adding some of the fun colors on the belly. Now, I did just start with some of the reds, but I really like having kind of this bright yellow right on the breast of it. So I'm going to grab some yellow. And if you're ever kind of dipping straight into pans and you're like, I don't know how much I have, you can always find a little open spot and just kind of tap off. And I'm just going to put that right here. Just adding some brightness. And now I'm going to dip into, let's go into some orange. And I'm just going to kind of tap in. And then let's go into some red. And tap in. So that is pretty darn vibrant, and a couple things are going to happen if I don't touch this. One, it's going to spread a bit more, and two, it will get a little desaturated, but so I could leave it like this, but I don't really like how that's spreading in that way. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to take a clean brush that I've just washed and then tapped off so that it's just barely damp, and we're going to just kind of, I'm going to lift this out. You don't have to. But I'm going to lift some of that out and kind of move a little bit of this around. Okay, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little water from my brush and I'm just going to drop in, well, that was a little too much. I'm going to drop in a little water kind of here to kind of push it away, push some of that pigment away, so it'll kind of give us the illusion of maybe a little bit of rounding right here. And now, when we look at this, notice there's a couple different areas of wetness here. Up here, can't really see the glistening because it's pretty much soaked in there. But down here, it's really wet. So depending on where we dropped color at this point, I'm also going to grab a little bit more of this just to take some of that off. But depending on where we added color in here, like right up here, I could add that beak and it would just be very soft, softly kind of distributed in here. But if I added any sort of details down here, like the legs, it's going to just really kind of go wherever because there's actually some standing water there. So let's try to add the beak. Okay, grabbing some of this black in here, and I'm going to be careful not to put it lower than here because this is where it's still really wet, but it's not very wet kind of up here. So I'm just going to add in a little beak here. Just like that. And see how it's just very kind of softly blending in because there's not a ton of water there. And keep in mind, your beak could look way different than mine. Birds are really unique in that they have all sorts of shapes and lengths of beaks. And so this one just has a little baby beak. So I am trying to kind of be patient a bit and wait for down here before I add those legs in so that it will kind of create the shadow. I do want it to bleed a bit into it, but I don't want it to go too soon. It's basically dry here. So at this point, if I wanted to, and you don't have to do this part, but if I wanted to, I could take some black around kind of these areas that are pretty much more or less dry. And if you wanted to add some texture, you could kind of come in here and kind of just tap your brush And those aren't going to move very much because that is pretty much dry. But if you wanted to add a little texture, this is a good point to do it because it'll soften it just a little bit because it's not entirely dry, but you don't have to. So we're getting close to where I want to add in those legs. But while I'm waiting, let's discuss bird legs because there are a couple options. If you're like, oh no, the legs really scare me, you have the option to, on the bottom of this, you could just have him like sitting on a branch, and then you could just take, once it's dry, and just kind of do a couple little marks like this so that you don't have to actually draw out those legs if it's a little bit too scary for you. So you could do something like that. I find it's actually better to kind of leave a little to the imagination, so you don't need to do something exact, but usually bird legs kind of come down and then they have like a backwards knee joint, kind of like this, and then they come out into, they have a couple, well, that one I didn't do quite very well, but they have their feet or whatever. There's one that goes back and then their other toes go front. So if you just kind of do like this little like backwards joint and then just kind of hint to some of that on the ground, and then at the very end, just take a wet brush. That one was still dirty, but and just kind of soften it out. It'll just kind of look like it's sitting on the ground and maybe you can't see entirely. So rather than this exercise is meant to be a low pressure thing, so don't stress yourself out if you're trying to make these little feet kind of a thing and you're like, this is not working. Just put a branch there. It's sitting on a branch. It's fine. All right, so I'm going to grab some of this, and at this point, this is still pretty wet. As a matter of fact, you know what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to wash my brush. I'm going to dry it because I'm getting some pooling down here. And I want this to be wet, but I don't want it to be so wet that it's going to really kind of affect the spread, because that would go all the way up that little bead. So I'm actually going to just grab some of that so that it's wet, but it's not any standing water. And then I'm going to grab some of this. All right, we'll see. This is the point where I either ruin a painting or it's fine. So, all right, his legs, let's put them right about here. I'm just going to touch kind of into that. See, it's going to kind of bleed in. And I'm going to very lightly just kind of drag my brush. He's going to have some long legs, I guess. Shorter legs are also a little bit easier to do. And let's put that here. They have kind of little knobbly areas. Trying not to be too worried about how that looks, because I'm going to wait in just a second. And I'm going to take a brush. I will once this soaks in a little bit more, and I'm just going to swipe down there to give it a little bit of a shadow anyways. But it also kind of obscure the feet mistakes that we've made. The other thing I want to do is I do want a little bit of shadowing towards the bottom, and I didn't get quite as much, so I'm going to put a little water in my brush, mix it into some of this black I have here, and very lightly just kind of touch this along here to get a little bit of shadowing towards the bottom of the body. Just like that. And there's enough, I think it's soaked in enough down here for me to take a clean brush with some fresh water, and I'm just going to swipe across just a couple times. It's just going to kind of obscure and create a little bit of a shadow, just like that. So before I add in the eye, I do want this to be a little bit more dry, so I'm going to wait, and I'm going to just double check to see if there are any comments that I need to answer. Yeah, so there's a comment about how when the paint bleeds out, you like that. And that's all about getting to know kind of those dryness points. So if you noticed, I was really kind of moving my page around to keep an eye on kind of how wet it was by getting kind of one of the lights to reflect off of the water. So I kind of knew what was going to happen. Not entirely, because watercolor is kind of unpredictable, but you can get a pretty good idea for what happens. Don't have your supplies, we love to do this. Oh yes, I hope you do. And also, if this records, I will be uploading, I do upload the lives to my YouTube channel, so you can watch them later, because I know some people can't make Saturday mornings. Some people are working or doing stuff, you know, but still want you to have access to this. The brush I'm using is actually one that I sell. It is a round brush with synthetic bristles, and it is a size 12. And I love the point on it. Owl legs, yes, they are funny. And I do these every other Saturday. Why do I pick up the paint and put it on my lid? This is a great question. So it all kind of comes down to, here, I'm going to put a little water on this so that we can kind of do a little experimenting, because it just kind of depends. You can absolutely go straight into one of these pans and you can get a lot of saturation. But a lot of times, you know, what I'm looking for is I don't want that dark. So I'll grab some of my brush, and it's hard to know sometimes how much your brush has actually picked up. So I can kind of smush this down a bit, and I can kind of control how much I'm actually getting in my brush, because I want a lighter wash like that. So that's why I will oftentimes kind of just grab some and then squiggle it down over here. It's just me trying to be like, okay, I have a better idea of how much I have in this to do what I want to do with it. Sometimes, yeah, I want to grab a whole bunch, but a lot of times that's not what I want to do. Oh, you and your daughters are watching? How fun. I hope you're painting along too, or going to paint this later. So do I paint wings on? I mean, yeah, sometimes. When I'm designing some of these exercises, and I'm also designing these lives, I'm thinking about a couple things. One, we could do wings, but things that are going to potentially kind of mess us up or make us feel like, ooh, that doesn't quite look great, are going to be things like wings. They're going to be things like really complex beaks or the legs. That's why I kind of encourage you to kind of go with what you're comfortable with. And so a lot of these are meant to be, yeah, if you want to paint some wings on them, absolutely go for it. But I'm trying to make sure that we keep this kind of nice and light so that we're able to, you know, feel successful at it, because it's going to give you more impetus to actually go and then maybe potentially try something a little harder. Hello, hello. You added a pompadour on your bird's head. That's really cute. You struggle to get yours watered down enough. Yeah, I do find that a lot of people, when they get started, or kind of when they're in the beginning, I'm going to put quotes around beginning stages of watercolor, they're a little bit worried about putting too much water down, and so they do use a little bit too little water. And so just don't be afraid of using a little bit extra water. If you're like, oh no, it's going to drip, it's going to whatever, it's fine. That's watercolor. The tape I'm using is just a very basic masking tape. Using what feels like a chalk-based paint. Is that wrong? There are some watercolors, especially some of the cheaper ones, like the ones that you might find at like the dollar store or something like that, or Five Below, that are a little bit chalkier. In my experience, the chalky ones can work. Although the dollar store, the $1.25 one, no, do not use that one. It literally flakes off of the paper afterwards. And so you're just going to waste $1.25 on it. But the $5 ones, if that's what's in your budget, or you're like, I don't know if I'm going to like this, they're not the best paints, and they are kind of chalkier, but you can still experiment and have fun with them and do some different things with them for sure. So how can you keep it from bleeding into other areas? We're going to paint another bird in just a second, and we'll explore that a little bit. So what I want to do on this one is I am going to add in the eye because I think this is dry enough where it's not going to bleed in. So I'm going to grab some of this. You could also do this with pen at the end if you're like, I'm going to mess it up because I'm not going to make a good circle. But I'm just going to put his little eye right about here. And then you can either avoid one area to give it a little bit of a glisten like that, or you can come back in afterwards with a white gel pen to add that back in if you forgot to add or forgot to leave a little space. So there's our first little goofy bird. And I'm going to set this one to the side, and we're going to start on another one. I might come back in and add some additional details to this one. We might mess around with this one a little bit more, but for now, this one's going to be set to the side. And while I'm setting up my next one that I'm going to paint, tell me what color you want, and then also tell me what colors you want to see on this one, because we could do whatever colors. These are our little imagination goofy birds, so we can have just a ton of fun and go kind of crazy with this. Blues, purples, pink, blue. Got a lot of blues. I love the teal and yellow idea too. That could be cute. Okay, I do love this idea. Was that you, Sunny, that said blue and yellow to help show how to keep the two colors separated? I also do like the idea of doing one that's like, we'll probably paint like 3 birds today. So, well, I'm gonna do this next one. Let's do as blue and yellow and try our best to keep the two colors separated. We're gonna kind of set a challenge for ourselves in essence. I might also throw in a little bit of gray on this one too. But let's experiment with trying to do some blue and some yellow, but keeping them separate to kind of answer that question. And then on the last one, let's just do like wild colors, like pink and purple, and maybe some blue, or we'll just kind of go with some really kind of bright, vibrant colors. Okay. All right, I said to vote while I was taping this down, and then I got very distracted by writing down the ideas. So I've painted quite a few birds. I have done some little like owls and things like that in the past, but I did them as a present for my dad, because that's one of the things that we do together is kind of do some very amateur bird watching. Which, speaking of which, we're painting birds today, and this morning I let Moogie out and I heard this chirping that I know is not chirping of normal birds in my trees. It was 2 juvenile eagles who were soaring and like play fighting while they were soaring over my neighborhood, and they were chirping at each other. So it's a good thing we're painting birds today, because I probably would have wanted to be painting birds anyways. All right, I'm gonna grab a little water. Okay, so I kind of want to, I don't know if I'll be able to replicate this exactly, but I kind of want to paint this like goofy shaped bird here where it's more just like an egg shape, because I don't know, it's just kind of fun. So I'm going to kind of go a little more egg shaped rather than kind of these more elongated type shapes. I do love this little bird, he's cute too, but I feel like doing a little more egg shape. So first thing I'm going to do is what we did to start the last time, which is just fill my brush with water, clean-ish water. My water's a little dirty now, but that's okay. And I'm going to just kind of make an egg type shape. So this is just kind of like a little weird little egg. And I don't even know if I'm going to add a tail right away. Maybe I will. Maybe I will. Okay, I'm going to. just kidding. Okay, I've got my egg shape, if you can see that. And I want the tail to kind of be up here a little bit, so I'm gonna put it there. Just kind of a goofy little bird. I've got a lot of water that's settling at the bottom, so let's just redistribute that real quick. And this is the one where I'm doing a more simplified shape of the bird, but we are gonna challenge ourselves a little bit. So we're gonna try to do blue and yellows and keep them separated. So I'm gonna start with the yellow, because sometimes it's easier to start with the lighter color, and let's put that kind of on the breast of the bird here. So I'm gonna grab some of this yellow. I probably should have cleaned off this. I'm gonna mix these two yellows together to get kind of really bright, but slightly less bright one. And I'm gonna go ahead and place this right here kind of on the chest. Okay, now we're getting a little bit of spread. So I'm gonna do a couple things to kind of help combat this from going together. First thing I'm gonna do is wash my brush, dry it off, and I'm actually going to push a little bit hard to kind of lift right from here, which is gonna create a little bit of a barrier so that's not gonna just move right across it. Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab some blue. I've got some blue here, so let's just use this blue. And I'm gonna place this on the other side. Need a little more water in there. Really pick up a bunch in here. And let's kind of make it a little dangerous. We're gonna really kind of get it to go kind of close. So at this point, because you can see it's starting to approach the yellow, and I don't necessarily want green in this, I'm gonna do a couple things. One, I'm gonna take a clean brush, which is just damp, it's been kind of tapped off, and I'm gonna start to kind of lift it and push it away to kind of control the direction. The other thing I could do is I could just take some water and I can actually kind of just dip it in between, which will kind of push some of those apart. But I want more blue kind of all throughout this. So we're creating separation in a couple ways. We're creating it with pushing water, lifting. We're also making sure that we're only placing it. We're kind of creating a barrier with space too. So I want more blue. All right, I do want a little bit of gray in this too. I mean, he doesn't have to have gray, but I'm feeling like a little bit of gray just to kind of add a little variation. So I'm gonna put a little gray right on his head, maybe here, maybe a little in his tail just to kind of break up that blue, and right along the bottom here. This one could be so cute. Okay, again, I'm getting a little bit running together, so I'm gonna just lift, dry my brush, and I'm just kind of using my brush as a way to kind of control where the water is running. All right, I'm gonna set that down for just a second because I wanna keep messing with this, but I feel like I'm kind of at a point where it's gonna be really cute or I'm gonna mess with it too much. Yeah, what if you get too much pigment and you don't want it there? That is exactly what lifting is for. Here, I'm gonna set this to the side for a minute and let's actually show this. I'm gonna even grab my little rag that I have here so you can see exactly what I'm doing. So let's say let's put a bunch of this down and you're like, oh no, I got way too much right there. I don't want that much. What I'm gonna do is wash my brush. I'm going to take it on my rag and tap it off so that it is not full of water. It's a little damp, and then I can just pick that up. Dry my brush, pick it up. Now I went real heavy there, and this is also the back side of the paper, which is not usually as forgiving, but I can also put a little water in my brush and very gently scrub here, tap to dry, and lift. So we can actually take a lot of that out if we don't like it. Okay, so here's where mine is so far. Let's do a little check on kind of how wet. Look how wet it is over here and right there. I'm also getting a lot of buckling. Well, I don't know if I'd say a lot of buckling, but I'm getting some slight buckling here. So it's up here and it's also up here, which is doing a couple interesting things. One, it's making a lot of this kind of pigment and color settle right into that little valley. And that's actually kind of creating that cute little collar that sometimes birds have kind of around their neck, which is good. But I do just need to kind of watch and make sure that it's not going to blend in too much because we were trying to keep the yellow and the blue separate. Although the yellow is almost dry in some areas, so I don't have to worry about that too much. But we need to just kind of, I need to be a little patient, but I am probably going to come back in and put a little more darker colors back here just to give it a little more depth kind of around the edges, maybe even just slightly over here. So yes, this is watercolor paper. It's 140 pound, but they're these little pre-made postcard things. Okay, so I'm gonna take some water in my brush and over here because I just want a really kind of light wash. Now, if you're like, I don't have the feel for how much water and how much pigment I have in my brush, keep a little like tester strip and you can always test it on that so that you know, okay, yeah, that is how much I wanted on my brush. I just want a little bit more kind of here just to give it a little more roundness. Maybe a little bit more over here. And I'm going to grab a little bit darker to put right kind of on the back in just a couple areas. Maybe right on the little tail too. Boop, just like that. I also think at this point, I can kind of decide, I kind of do think I'm going to do like a little branch type situation here. So I've got some browns here. I'm just going to kind of, let's just smush some of these together. I think I'm going to grab a little blue to put in that because I want it to be a little bit darker brown. There we go. And I'm going to make just a little like whoop right underneath it, trying not to touch it. Just like that. There's a little branch. And I'm going to add a little shadow. We could do this with blue or whatever color towards the bottom just to give it a little variation. Just like that. And we need to let this one dry before I can add in most of the other details. We might be able to add in the little beak at this point. Let's see. Yeah, let's try to add in the beak too. While we're waiting, I guess I'm just kidding. I'm just gonna do most of this stuff right now. All right, I'm gonna add in a little beak. And I kind of like that it bleeds in a little bit because it kind of gives him like a little color on his face, but it's bleeding a little more than I expected. So I'm gonna, again, wash my brush, dry it, and just lift a little of this out. I'll come back in and darken the beak in a minute. And I'm just gonna kind of swoop into where some of these are here. His little feet. We can darken those up in a minute too. All right, for real now, I'm gonna set this one to the side and we're gonna do a really bright, colorful bird. Okay, so far, just as a little recap, we started with this one. Now we have this one. This one still needs an eye and it needs some of the details kind of darkened. Just to kind of add a little more interest to it. But we're gonna do one more, and this is gonna be the one where we're gonna do lots of really bright, fun colors. So I'm gonna tape this down. let's just see. So the setup is pretty simple. I just have, it's a gooseneck. It's a gooseneck camera holder that I have attached to a little shelf. And then it's just my cameras or my phone's in it. When you're done, how do you set the paint so it doesn't run later? You have to be careful with setting sprays because since watercolor is a liquid activated type thing, that can actually make stuff run. There are some watercolor setting sprays that claim to be, I'm terrified of them personally. And actually the only thing I've ever found that I like to actually set stuff with is this Dorland's wax medium, but honestly you don't need to seal watercolor because it's usually framed behind glass, and so that's usually the protection that you have. Okay, so I've got this one down. How do you not show brush strokes? I think that's going to kind of depend on a couple things. One is how wet or dry you're working. 2 is going to be your paper. And also 3 is going to be how hard you're pushing your brush down. Now, this is something that I'm starting to think about when I'm doing my sketchbook exercises. I haven't quite figured it out yet. But one of the things that I want to talk about is when we kind of glide across the page versus when you kind of push it across the page. Because see how we get a little separation because the brush kind of picks up some of the pigment as you're pushing along rather than being kind of like a very light, like it's just kind of hovering on top of the page. So think about the pressure you're putting on the brush. I haven't quite figured out how to do a fun little exercise on that, but it's something I am thinking about. How do I find the wooden blocks for the paper? So these are actually just pieces of cardboard. As a matter of fact, like what I do is, so this is a pad of Canson XL watercolor paper, and on the back of it is this. And so when I go through an entire pack of paper, I save these, and then if I want smaller ones, I cut them to be the size I want them to be. Yeah, the brush I am using is one I sell because I had a hard time finding ones that have really good points. So I wanted to have one that had a really good point. But there are other brands that are pretty decent. What you're looking for, because, you know, while I do like being able to sell things that I like, one, I know I don't do international shipping, so I know not everybody can get it. No, not everybody, you know, either has the funds and maybe you need to look for something else, or, you know, also I'm impatient personally, and so I can totally relate to like, no, I'm going to go out and buy this today because I don't want to wait for shipping. So what you want to look for when you are looking for a watercolor brush is you want one that obviously is going to feel good in your hand. And then what I recommend for beginners is finding one that has synthetic bristles, because they have just enough give to do some fun stuff, but not so much give that you don't have any control. And so synthetic bristles, they're sometimes also called Taklon bristles, Taklon. And I recommend getting one that has a really nice point on it in a size 10 or a size 12. That's going to allow you to do a ton of stuff. Some people will prefer size 8. And some of the brands do vary in how big a size 10 or 12 is. So if you're, but this is like, look, it's kind of like half width of my finger or something like that. So that's what you're going to want to actually look for when you do go kind of browse around, if you're more an in-person type of, you know, shopper, that type of thing. So that's what I would look for. All right, let's see. Just catching up on comments. So I teach these classes every other week, and these ones are just free because I just really love our little community here. And then I do also have some like pre-recorded online classes. I used to teach in-person classes, but then everything changed with the pandemic. All right, so this one is one we're gonna go with really, really bright colors. So I'm gonna re-wet these because I wanna make sure I've got access to lots of pigment. We kind of said we really wanted to go for it on this one with pinks and purples and blues, and maybe we'll throw in some yellows too. I don't know, let's find out. And all right, I liked the shape of the last bird, so I think I might kind of go for that one again. Just because I don't know what it is about that shape, but it kind of makes me happy. So again, I'm going to start with kind of an egg shape. I'm just going to pre-wet this area. Make him have a little bit more of a little belly there. And I'm going to kind of bring it to a point here to kind of be the little tail. Again, I'm just going to make sure that the water is distributed evenly throughout, just like that. And now we're just going to go for it. Now this one I'm going to have a slightly different approach with. So I'm going to, rather than just really kind of placing things exactly where I want them to be, I'm going to really just go bold with the color here. Yeah, avocado shaped for sure. So I'm going to go straight into some of these, and I'm just going to place this down. This is my favorite color. I'm gonna put it there too. Sure, why not? Okay, let's go into pink. Now, bear with me on this because I have a plan. I know that, I mean, right now it doesn't really look like I have a plan because I don't entirely, but I kind of have a plan. So I'm gonna put a little yellow here too, just to make it a little bright. Let's do a little more blue down here and right here. Okay, all right, so there's a lot of kind of nonsense going on this right now. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to use water and my brush to kind of affect how these all move together. So one is I want this area to be lighter so it looks a little more bulbous. So I'm going to drop some water in and also lift a little bit out. And maybe kind of squiggle some of these colors around together. Ooh, just a little squiggling. And we're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to drop in some water just to kind of push some of that away, which will also give us some interesting texture. And I'm going to be a little bit bold. Let's put a little bit of this blue kind of here too. I like to give them that little collar. I don't know why, but the collar on the birds, I just think it's so cute. You know what? This feels like a real funky bird, so I want to give him a little tuft. So we're gonna kind of tuft it up. There we go. Let's put a little pink up here too. It's kind of like he has a little mohawk. And at this point, all I'm going to do is just kind of keep an eye on how wet certain areas are. I kind of like the front part. I don't really want to mess with that, but I do want to add some darker colors towards the back. So we're going to drop in some more of these blues and things towards the back while things are still wet. And just kind of down here. Oh, let's bring in some of that purple. Going straight in. I'm not tapping anything off. This one is going to be our real wild bird. You know what? I'm going to keep it just like that. This one's going to be fun. I wonder, should I do a branch on this one or not? The rare Technicolor chickadee. Yes to a branch. All right, let's do a branch. I'm thinking this is more like a, okay, I'm gonna I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this right now, but I'm going to try. So I'm going to try to make this kind of like one of those like birch type branches. So I'm actually going to take this piece of paper here, and on the edge, I'm going to put a little bit of this black. And let's see if I have enough on here. There we go. We can start a little branch. Let's make it a little birch branch. See, it's kind of a rough cut on there, so it's going to give me some of that texture. And then I'm going to do the same from underneath, kind of in the opposite way. How about that? We have a little kind of like birch type branch. That's fun. I don't know why, but that was kind of a fun little thing to do. So maybe I'll come back in a minute and do a second little swipe from the bottom to give it a little more depth. Yeah, you can use anything. A lot of times I'll just look around and just kind of grab something when I'm trying to do different little things. Okay, so this one I'm gonna let sit for a minute. Because it is still pretty wet. So I'm gonna wait to do anything else to this. Let's grab our little blue and yellow dude. And I'm gonna come back in, and I probably waited a little bit too long to have a nice kind of bleed into this area, but let's add his little beak in here. We could also do this with pen details too once everything's nice and dry. But let's make his beak a darker color. Just like that. And then we can add a little eye. Maybe I'm gonna go even littler on this one. So this one I think is cute, but I'm kind of feeling like this area is a little bit flat. So I'm gonna actually take my brush and I'm gonna wash it so that there's quite a bit of water, and I'm gonna get just a tiny bit of this gray. And I kind of think I wanna like give him a little like eye socket kind of area with just a little texture. I don't know if this is actually helping it, but I don't know, to me it was just a little bit flat, so I'm just gonna kind of try to add a little texture around his eyes. I don't know if that helped. Well, I did it, so here we are. I'm just kind of messing with it. Maybe he needs some more texture throughout the rest of him now. No regrets. I mean, I feel like I kind of have regrets, but I'm going with it. I'm gonna add a little more texture to a couple areas here. Yeah, and I will try to upload this to YouTube in the next couple days. We're just gonna add some texture. Look, I meant to have texture all along. It was always the plan. I don't know, he's still kind of cute. I feel like I kind of let him down, but he's still kind of cute. I think we need to darken these little feet too. Just like that. Maybe it's his beak. Maybe he doesn't have a big enough beak. I thought a little tiny cute beak would be cute, but maybe he needs a bigger beak. Maybe this one I will let sit for a second because I feel like I'm going to keep messing with it and go past the point of a benefit. This could also be a fun one for us to play with in a second with some pen to just kind of see the difference between leaving a bird where it's just watercolor and then one where you have some like mixed media elements on top. All right, this one is pretty wet on the bottom, but it's pretty dry up here, so I'm going to try to add in the beak on this one. And I kind of feel like we should keep going with the Technicolor vibes. So I'm going to take some of this blue, and maybe we'll grab a little bit of that gray color, but let's keep him funky. And I feel like based on the way his tuft is, maybe his beak goes down just a little bit. Maybe he's got a bit of a longer beak too. Oh yeah. Yeah, I feel like that beak suits him. He looks like an old man bird. The one with the texture. Yeah, I could totally see that. And you know what? We're gonna start to add in... No, I'm gonna wait. Hold on. I want to do another swipe from the bottom on this little like birch type of a thing. Just to give it a little bit more color from the bottom so that it kind of like is kind of in shadow, but you know, we're... Gotta load it up again. We're giving a little shadow, not a lot. Not a lot of shadow, but a little shadow. And then I'm gonna take that and let's add his little feet. Boop. To kind of curl around, I guess. All right, not gonna overthink it, just gonna kind of let it be. I feel like his feet are over here, but they're tucked up, so that's he's sitting on his legs. I don't know. Oh, use a little mini branch underneath the main one. Okay. Let's do it. We have to wait for a second anyways for things to kind of dry and settle, so might as well. Might as well. We have a second little branch. That one would kind of go behind there, so here, let's try to darken right here. Painting with paper, there we go. Do I paint cats? No, I mean, I have painted cats. It's not one of the things that I paint a lot. I do, landscapes are usually my thing. Landscapes and like simple abstracts are my favorite things to paint. So the paper can get wavy after, well, it usually settles down when it dries. One little thing you can do on low heat on an iron is you can actually iron your watercolor paintings. I usually put them between parchment paper, but that will help get some of the wave out if you end up with one that's like just crazy waves. Okay. I think I can add his eye in now too, so I'm gonna do that. Trying to avoid one area so there's a little kind of glimmer in his eye. He is the goofiest little bird. I love him. All right, so we have 5 minutes left. I can either, we've got two options here because I think I'm gonna call this one done, and I'm also gonna call this one done. I can either answer some questions or we could play around with adding in some pen details. I don't know if it's gonna help this bird, but we could play around with it so you can kind of see the difference if that's what you want, or I can just do some like question answering and things like that. The tie-dye cardinal, yeah. One vote for pen. All right, let's play around with pen. So, this is not entirely dry. So I am going to take a second and I'm going to use a heat gun on this to make it entirely dry before I try to add some pen details on here. If anybody is sensitive to noises, this will be loud for probably about 30 seconds. So feel free to turn the volume down now and I'll give you a little countdown in case you need to kind of mute me so that you don't have to hear this noise. So in 3, 2, 1, go. should be good enough. So the reason why I took the time to dry that, it would have been dry enough to add some more details on, but with using paint and things like that. But when we add pen details, and when you're thinking about using pen for watercolor, there's a couple things to keep in mind. I've got two different pens here. This one is not a waterproof or water resistant one. This one is. And what that means is that if it were under the paint and we painted on top of it, this one would just smudge and smear across the page. This one's going to stay where it was. But if we're adding it as a last step and we're not going to paint anymore, you can use whatever pen you want to. You don't have to have a water resistant or waterproof one so that we can kind of do whatever we want. But we don't want to try to draw on wet paper because it just pushes water up into the nib and then makes it so that you can't use it very well. I personally like felt tip pens or pens kind of like this over something like a fountain or like a ballpoint pen or something like that, but that's just my personal preference. I have been liking this Pentel point liner. I also like this one, but I do not know the brand. This is something I bought years ago on Amazon as a felt tip pen. So we're gonna just kind of start by adding in a little bit of detailing. So let's do, I don't entirely know what I want to do. I'm gonna start on the branch because it feels less intimidating. So I'm gonna really kind of lean into some of the natural nooks and crannies that are happening with the shape of this. And I might even kind of come in here and add in a little bit of kind of almost just to kind of create a little bit of that shadowing. I don't know. I'm just going with the flow here, just kind of listening to what my brain is telling me to do. We're not doing a perfect painting today. All right, so we can come in here and we can kind of define some of these his little toes. Add in a little more detail, and then maybe I'll actually kind of outline at least the bottom part. And this is where we could come in and create some separation. So if you wanted to kind of add in the wing detail here, and maybe this is kind of the tail detail. Maybe it comes in and there are some little feathers here. You could add in some little details here. But even that kind of does help at least some of this. It's not, this is not a perfect painting. I do feel like there's something just kind of off about his beak. Like maybe it needs to be, oh yeah, even that helps. Even that helps. So we're going to give him a little bigger beak. Maybe he has a little bit more, maybe he actually has a little more of this kind of darker color on his head. Maybe we were missing a bit of that. I'm going to kind of subtly turn him into like one of those black-capped chickadees, I guess. I feel like I'm giving him a bowl cut. Should he have a little tuft? I don't know. Just like a little one? Just a little one, yeah. Okay. Just adding a little texture to him. I do like him a little bit better. What if you give him bird eyeliner? You know, so birds, if we do actually really look at their eye shape, they do usually have like a second, like, kind of lid area around. So we can give him a little bit extra there. Just adding texture. I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing at this point, but I'm adding things so that we can see. There, I kind of like him. Maybe we add a little bit of kind of hatching underneath where I put that wing, just to give it the illusion of shadow. Needs more on his belly. I could see that. I don't know. All right. So I'm gonna take these off real quick because I need to wrap up because I need to eat breakfast still. And I'm gonna take the tape off. A few things about tape. A lot of people have problems with tape ripping their paper. There's a couple things you can do. One, you can heat it up with a hairdryer, which will help release the adhesive. The other thing is I try to peel it from this way so it kind of comes off a little easier. And it's also going to depend on your paper that you're using. Some papers are just way more prone to ripping than other papers. This one is fairly tough, so I'm gonna keep him. I'm not worried about it too much. Okay, I do really like him. He's cute. He's cute. You concur with the bow tie? Oh my gosh. I want to, but I would have to think about how to do it with this thing. So these are little postcards, actually. This is something I am thinking about adding to my shop, are these little, they're little tins filled with a bunch of postcards in them that you can paint on. They're watercolor paper. So you could send your friends a little postcard. And so you might find yourself liking one style or another. A lot of times I really like the kind of depth that pen details can add to watercolor. So if you're like, well, I like my bird, but he feels kind of flat or something like that, consider adding a couple little scribbles on him. Okay, so how would you protect the postcards in the mail? There are two things you can do. One is not worry about it and just send it. The second is you can seal it with wax. I did a test a long time ago where I actually painted two things, and one I sealed with that wax and one I didn't, and I sent 2 postcards to Andrea, and she lives in several states away, so they had to go pretty far through the mail, and both of them showed up in very nice condition. It didn't actually really matter. So here are the birds we made today. If you did make birds, if you post them on Instagram, please tag me. I love seeing what you guys paint. It's a lot of fun for me to see. Other than that, I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful day, and I'm going to go make some French toast, I think. So have a great day, and thank you so much for joining me.